Let's talk about the power of habit. What is going on, you guys? Tyler, your wandering therapist here today. I am flying solo today, but I've got some thoughts on my mind that I'd love to share and hopefully will be helpful to you. Um, Brannon is out busy. He had another meeting today. He's had some changes in his life that have him kind of going a lot of different directions right now, but he will be back here on Monday. So today I wanted to talk about something that I've actually been kind of studying a lot for my own gain and that I've been working on for myself, and thought I might just share some of the key elements that I'm learning and that I'm trying to put into place that seem to be helping with you. So if you're in a position right now where, every one of us probably is, I mean, part of the reason why a lot of people listen to this podcast in the first place is actually because of the fact that we've formed bad habits that are somehow causing problems in our life or destroying our lives. And now we're learning how to try to create new habits. So that's what we're going to talk about today is some key principles and understanding about habit, how a habit forms, how we can alter a habit or change a habit, and just becoming more intentional aware with what it is that we're actually doing to our own lives with the inputs we're putting in and how that relates to the outputs that are coming out. So there's a few things. I'll share some personal examples with this. I think I referenced one of these things in our last podcast with Brannon about trying to stop drinking soda and how some of these principles have applied. Maybe talk about that with you, and then also some things that I'm currently working on in my own life. So the information that we're going to talk about kind of comes from several different sources. The primary ones that we'll talk about today, if you're interested and want to go check these out, are The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg, Atomic Habits, and then an old classic book that's one of my favorites of all time called The Greatest Salesman in the World by Og Mandino. And I'm going to fuse several principles from each of those books into the discussion today in thinking about this process of habit. So, the first thing I'd just challenge you guys to think about is what is what is a habit that's been with you for a very, very long time? Maybe a bad habit that you want to get rid of. I have one in particular. I'm doing pretty well with it right now, but I have a tendency to not only bite my fingernails, but after I bite my fingernails, I tend to sort of clean up all the skin around it, my cuticles, and then that ends up ripping and making me bleed. And a lot of times I have kind of like sores on the ends of my fingers. It's been something that has been with me for pretty much my whole life. I remember it being a little boy. I had to have been like 9 or 10 years old. I would always chew my nails to the point of bleeding, and I would usually do it when I was nervous or stressed out about something. And I remember, my parents trying to help me. My mom got that really nasty tasting stuff that you put on the ends of your fingers so that it would remind you not to bite your fingernails. And we tried that for a while, but then I just got to where I sort of liked the taste of it, and it didn't really help anymore because the habit was so strong. I remember being in like I must have been 13, 14 at the time, maybe in a soccer tournament, and it was a championship game, and we went to a shootout, and I happened to be the fifth shooter. So you take turns shooting like penalty shots in soccer. I happened to be the fifth shooter, and I was chewing my nails the whole time during this shootout to where there was like nothing left, and it was basically just raw sores on the end of all of my fingers. And my mom was sitting there watching the whole thing on the sidelines, and she told me afterwards that she wanted to yell at me to stop chewing my nails, but she was so afraid that she would ruin my psyche and my routine that she just let it happen. And then I took my shot, whatever. And so I think back on that's been with me for like truly like a bad habit. It's been with me for, 40 years, almost 40 years probably. And I've worked really hard at trying to get rid of that habit. And there have been periods of time where, maybe there's been some success. I've gone for weeks, months at a time. I think I'm on a pretty good streak right now. I think I'm about 6 or 7 weeks in this time around of kind of breaking this habit that I have with my fingernails. Um, but I've learned a lot about myself in the process, and I've started to learn a lot more about myself and what actually happens. And I wanted to share a few of those principles with you as you think of your own habits. Some of you might have addictive things that are going on. Um, that are causing real havoc in your life, some kind of a sexually compulsive behavior, or maybe some kind of substance problem or a spending problem, or it might be that you're numbing out with your social media or something else to the point of it being detrimental to your life, and can't seem to stop it. That's what we're going to talk about today is how do you understand and alter a habit. So the first thing that I wanted to kind of get into kind of comes from the Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg, and it's learning to understand the nature of our habits and how they actually work within us. So physiologically, neurologically, habits form in an effort for our brains to reserve energy, to conserve energy, and not have to use up all of the energy stores that it has. So, you've heard the term neurons that fire together, wire together. Well, if you do that multiple times, then those neurons kind of form a pathway, and then that pathway starts to be coated over by a process called myelination. Myelination basically protects that pathway and makes it stronger, and it also makes it more likely to be used. And it can now be used in ways that require less energy because it's something the body and the brain already know. So it starts to happen automatically. So when we're changing any type of a behavior, we're actually working against what the body has already formed in an effort to try to conserve its own energy. That's why changing a habit is so difficult. That's why it's so hard, is because the body wants the brain in some ways wants everything to be in order. It wants to have order and simplicity, and it wants to conserve everything. And now when you step in and try to change something, what you're doing is working actually against what the brain has tried to do, because it thinks that what you were doing was what you wanted it to be doing. So so you can look at it from kind of this idea of willpower. Willpower is the resource. The willpower is the resource that is sort of given to us every day on a certain level to make conscious choices with or unconscious choices with, that is the piece of us that would allow us to work towards changing some of our behaviors. But willpower alone is a finite resource, and it runs out and it runs low. And so sometimes we wake up and something has happened and we're highly motivated to do something. Some of us probably had this. I've 1,000 times been highly motivated to stop like messing with my fingers and cutting myself. And we dive into it and we go all out, but then it can't be sustained because that willpower depletes itself. And if it doesn't get replenished and used properly, then we're left with nothing but the habit loop and no motivation to change it anymore. And then the habit wants to kind of take over again and put you back on the same track over and over and over again. That's why somebody who's been an alcoholic for, say, like 20 years, but they're sober, they'll always talk about like if your first drink is basically your last drink again, because the brain will, if you go back to drinking, the brain will already is cued to want to remember that. Even though it's rewired itself in some ways, it's already primed for that old habit to kick back in. And so we want to choose to use our willpower towards the establishment of the new habit. And sometimes we try to go and do like 20 things at a time. And instead of doing 20 things at a time, 1 to 2 things at a time, consistently done until it becomes a new habit, a little bit at a time will yield bigger results than really big things all at once, and your willpower gets depleted. So for, I talked about this, I think, on the last podcast, but with my soda drinking, I decided to stop drinking soda for a while. This was probably a decade ago. And I I said, I'm going cold turkey. I'm not drinking any soda anymore. But then every single day I was failing. And and I was thinking, man, like how come I keep like relapsing on soda? Like it can't be that addictive, but it actually was for me. I was drinking, I think, about 264 ounces a day minimum. Um, I knew that I had a problem when I've always in my lifetime had really good teeth. but I went to the dentist and he said before he even took the x-rays, he said, "You drink way too much soda." I said, "Actually, I do. I drink a ton of soda. How do you know that?" And he's like, "Oh, I can tell you right now, you've got a bunch of cavities that need to be fixed." I've never had cavities in my life before. And and then he took the x-rays and I had 13 cavities, 13 little cavities all over my teeth. And he said they were in all the places that people who drink a lot of soda have them. So that was like my wake up call. That was that moment of like unmanageability in my life where I was like, wow, this isn't just some casual problem. This is a real problem for me and I need to make some changes in my life. And so I started and I tried to just go all out and quit and I couldn't. I kept failing. And so I started doing some of the tools that I teach my clients. And one of those tools is to actually map out the process of a full relapse. And the mapping of the process of the full relapse includes emotional processes, mental processes, logistical things, and events that happen in your day. And you map it out in as great of detail as possible, almost try to see everything you can. And then you go back through it and you look for, okay, what is the payoff that I get when I drink that soda? And I could tell you both positives and negatives, the consequences, obviously decreased health, being on the verge of being diabetic, obviously problems with my teeth, shame, feeling, gaining weight, um, all of those things. But the payoff is there is a real payoff when it comes to emotional coping for me. There's a little bit of like a boost right when that carbonation hits the top of your brain. Um, I mean, my mouth's watering right now as I talk about it. And and so there's that payoff. There's the payoff of the emotional sort of like soothing that happens. And for me, it's weird, but I think I might have ADD because when I drink caffeine, it actually like zones me in more instead of hyping me up. It almost kind of puts me into a grounded state. And so that's what going in at 3 o'clock every afternoon to the gas station was doing for me. Now, according to the power of habit, the way that you start to break that habit is you have to find the three parts of it. One is the thing that kicks off the trigger or the urge. Two is the process that you use to get to the payoff. And three is understanding what the payoff is. And then, according to the power of habit, you work on the middle part. So you've got to change the pattern that you get to the payoff. So what I needed was some kind of grounding. I needed some kind of like soothing, and I needed some kind of like head rush. That's what I was going for when I was going into the gas station every day to get my soda. And so I'm going to have to understand that I've got to find and build a new pathway to get to those same rewards that doesn't include drinking 128 ounces of soda every day. Um, and and that just understanding that makes it so that I'm not a bad person because I can't stop. It means that I'm not being effective and that I do have some things that need some attention and that now I need to learn how to be intentional with the way I go about moving towards those things that need attention in and doing those in ways that are more effective than the current way I've been doing it because I get all those negative outcomes. So you take that and you say, okay, I'm going to work on the middle part, but now the middle part feels big. It feels overwhelming. And this comes from Atomic Habits, and Atomic Habits says that small changes over time produce massive results. So the small change that I came to when I understood my pattern is that I I I would relapse every time I went into a gas station. I was on the road a lot for work at the time, and that was my way of kind of like having something to do while I drove. And I realized one day after I'd been going into the gas station for like 2 straight weeks getting a soda that right when I walked through the door and I looked over at the lighting of the drink machines, my mouth would start to water. And it dawned on me that if I didn't go into the gas station, there was a very good chance that I would never drink a soda because I didn't really buy it anywhere else. My habit loop was at the gas station, fountain drink, because fountain drinks are way better than bottled drinks anyway. Everyone knows that. Um, but at least I believe that. Brannon might disagree. But that became the one thing that I was going to put my willpower into. My finite use of willpower was going to be don't go into the gas station, period. That was one thing that I could do. That's one thing that I felt like I could follow through on. And I started to do that. And lo and behold, I got to a week of not drinking soda, and 2 weeks of not drinking soda, and 3 months of not drinking soda, and 6 months of not drinking soda. And it grew to be about 8 years of not having a soda. And it all started with one thing that was like a break in the middle part of my pattern. It was just one thing, and then that one thing grew into multiple things, and that's what's cool about habits is once we learn to understand what they do, you can actually start to stack them on top of each other for good. So think about it from like recovery. At first, in my own recovery from, say, pornography, I realized that my habit included always, it was every time I acted out, I was always alone on the internet and I was usually stressed, bored, tired, something like that. And then I had certain patterns that I would use where I would purposely carve out time to quote do homework or a project or something. And then after I'd get something done, I'd want to go and celebrate. And so then I'd go over to like social media or YouTube and I'd scroll and I'd find hobbies and interests, but then that would get boring. And then inevitably something on the sidebar would pop up, some clickbait, and I'd finally succumb to that and click that. And then I'd feel bad about it and be like, oh, well, I've already messed up. And then I jump over and go and fully act out. And what I realized when I started to map out my own processes is that I really was highly motivated at the time to want to change this behavior because I was going to lose everything in my life that was important. I realized that it felt so overwhelming to try to quit. I didn't even believe that I could quit, but I knew I had to. It was a rough spot to be in emotionally. And I realized that when I started to map out my patterns, the way that I could be 100% at trying to stay sober from pornography had to mean that I couldn't be on the internet alone. And when I started to look at that, I realized that if I had the internet on my phone, I would totally cheat on that. So my first two bottom lines were no internet alone. And for me, I got rid of all internet technology off of my phone. So I was basically at a dumb phone level for a couple of years. Then I had a third one that I added, which was that I just didn't get on YouTube at all because YouTube was like this, just the insignia that I would see. It would in essence make my mouth start to water again. It would turn on that kind of urge. So I set those three bottom lines in place and I treated them like my life depended on it. It just took those three things. Now I'm saying just, some people are thinking you're crazy. Like you didn't use the internet alone. And yeah, that happened for probably 3 years or so before I started to bring back certain things. I think YouTube I brought back about 4 or 5 years in, with some different kinds of new rules. But the point is that was the basis of changing a habit. So that habit started to change, and it got to where I realized that I could have confidence that I could be sober, and I didn't have to work at those bottom lines that I had set in place after a few months. They were just the way that I lived. They became the new normal. They became the way that I lived my life. And so then I had this leftover willpower now that I had used to establish those habits that I could put towards something else. And the next thing that I decided to do is say, you know what, I want to be a little bit more present with my daughters. So I'm going to put my willpower into making sure that my new bottom line is that I always sing to them and tell them a story and tuck them into bed at night. I want to take ownership for the bedtime routine because that's going to allow me to have presence with my daughters and some kind of influence. And I made a goal that I would have and develop a relationship with my girls that for as long as they lived in my house, I would always be a welcome visitor inside their bedroom, a safe place where they could go and have their own safety, but they would want me to be there if they ever needed anything to talk or have connection. So I put my willpower into developing the bedtime routine. And once that started to happen, it became a new normal part of my life. And I now had willpower to put towards something else. And the next piece was that I wanted to learn how to battle better for my wife's heart. So I decided to start reading certain other books, dedicating some time in my dailies towards understanding how to be a better husband, how to be more engaged, how to be more empathetic. And that became part of my goal. And there, I would dedicate some of my time and my energy towards that. And so you see how it starts to happen where it stacks on top of each other. And if you do it that way, then the original habit that you were looking to change, the original habit that you were looking to change is already taking care of itself. And now you've created a buffer that is actually distancing you from that in the first place. But now that buffer is also moving you into new places where your life starts to look different. It starts to take on a different hue, a different color, a different vibration. And you start to not even consider that you'd ever wanted to do those things in the past. I never ever thought that this would be possible when I started my recovery because I was so consumed in my head in my downtime with all of the thoughts of fantasy, objectification. Sex was the constant driver. I never thought that I could stand in a place that I am today and say, you know what? Yeah, sex is a part of my life and I love it. But man, I look forward to having downtime so I can think of projects at work and I can ponder my clients' problems and I can think about how I can learn to be a better therapist or a better father. And those things start to come naturally now as a result of all those little habit stacks that happened over time. So whatever it is that you're trying to change, try to find one or two things that will start to move the mark. Dedicate your willpower to those two things until they become habit. And once they become habit, take your willpower and add something else on top of it. And over time, you start to create this chain of life-changing habit based off of very, very simple and small things. Another principle that I'm learning that's been very helpful with this is that habits don't die easy. And one of the things that comes from the book Atomic Habits is this idea that if you set a goal to make any change in your life, most of us set a goal and then when we're not perfect at it, we experience it as failure and we throw our hands up and we say, "Oh well, it's all is lost." And according to Atomic Habits, we have to treat ourselves differently. We've got to treat ourselves with a little bit more of a growth mindset. And the commitment to change becomes I'm going to set my new line and I'm going to make sure that I'm as consistent as possible. And if I have a slip on that new line, it will only be a single slip instead of multiple days. So I will never go 2 days in a row with the old habit. I will go multiple days with the new habit. And if I have a break, then I'll pick it right back up. So I'm exercising the muscle of the change rather than exercising the muscle of the habit. Because the way habits formed in the first place is that they just happened to be a repeated pattern that happened over and over again. It's just that we, with a lot of our bad habits, didn't realize we were forming those because we didn't understand ourselves in the way that we work. So now we're going to use the same process intentionally to let our bodies and brains do exactly what they're designed to do, which is they want to make whatever we're choosing to do more easy if we're doing it consistently, and that's how it'll form the habit. So, one other thought for you, this is something that kind of doing this kind of work, we talk about this frequently, but it puts me in touch with my grandfather. My grandpa Harris, he was a big, big guy on like self-help and self-discipline and habits. And doing this work puts me in touch with him that way. And one of the things that he kind of left with me, I happened to be living in his house. He had gotten remarried after his wife died, and he was living in the same condo complex as his condo was. But me and my wife were actually renting his condo from him. And when he passed away, we were the ones living in his house. And so we were kind of starting to round up his stuff after he passed away. And inside of there, we found books upon books, journals upon journals of him writing day after day, writing his affirmations in a journal. He had a personal creed that he had created that he would quote to himself every day. And inside of his possessions, there was a book, and it was an old book called The Greatest Salesman in the World by Og Mandino. And the gift in that was that that book, I picked it up and I started to read it, and I realized that my grandfather had annotated it. He'd put notes all throughout the book. So I got this gift of being able to read not only what I think is one of the best books on habit and healthy life ever written in The Greatest Salesman in the World, but I got to read my grandfather's notes and the commitments that he was making and the thoughts and insights that he was having. And it was just such a treat and a treasure to be able to kind of see the behind the scenes work that my grandfather had done throughout his life to produce the outcomes of who he was to me, just as my grandfather on the front. And I was kind of stunned at how much effort and work he had put into developing the life that I so much admired and respected. Um, so this book, the very first part of the book, it's a book that kind of goes through this sort of like journey that a man goes on to try to understand himself better. And he wants to become the greatest salesman in the world, not ever realizing that at the end of the book, this is really a book about life. And it goes through 12 different or 10 different scrolls. And each scroll is like a principle of being a great salesman or a great person. I know this is going to be a little bit long, but I want to read it. This is the first scroll. And I remember just reading this with my grandfather's notes down the side and just thinking about his life and then seeing how he had kind of put this into practice. And so I just want to read it to you. This is the first scroll. It says, "Today I begin a new life." And the goal in the greatest salesman in the world is that you take one scroll and you read it, the same scroll, for 30 days in a row, with the idea that these ideas will sort of settle into you and become part of your being in your life if you repeat them multiple times. And then you move to the next scroll. So you're actually going to go you're going to go about 10 months before you actually finish the book if you do it the way that it was designed, because you're going to read the scroll for 30 days, each scroll for 30 days. So, um, so it says, "Today I begin a new life. Today I shed my old skin, which hath too long suffered the bruises of failure and the wounds of mediocrity. Today I am born anew, and my birthplace is a vineyard where there is fruit for all. Today I will pluck grapes of wisdom from the tallest and fullest vines in the vineyard, for these were planted by the wisest of my profession and have come before me generation after generation. Today I will savor the taste of grapes from these vines, and I verily will swallow the seed of success buried in each, and new life will sprout inside of me. The career I've chosen is laden with opportunity, yet it is fraught with heartbreak and despair, and the bodies of those who have failed, were they piled one atop another, would cast its shadow down upon all the pyramids of the earth. Yet I will not fail, as the others, for in my hands I now hold the charts, which will guide me through this perilous waters to shores which only yesterday seemed but a dream. Failure will no longer be my payment for my struggle. Just as nature made no provision for my body to tolerate pain, neither has it made any provision for my life to suffer failure. Failure, like pain, is alien to my life. In the past, I accepted it as I accepted pain. Now I reject it, and I'm prepared for wisdom and principles which will guide me out of the shadows into sunlight of wealth, position, and happiness far beyond my most extravagant dreams, until even the golden apples in the garden of Hesperides will seem no more than my just reward. Time teaches all things to he who lives forever, but I have not the luxury of eternity. Yet, within my allotted time, I must practice the art of patience, for nature acts never in haste. To create the olive, king of all the trees, 100 years is required. An onion plant is old in 9 weeks. I have lived as an onion plant. It has not pleased me. Now I wouldst become the greatest of olive trees, and in truth the greatest of salesmen. And how will this be accomplished? For I have neither the knowledge nor the experience to achieve greatness, and already I have stumbled in ignorance and fallen into pools of self-pity. The answer is simple. I commence my journey unencumbered with either the weight of unnecessary knowledge or the handicap of meaningless experience. Nature already has supplied me with knowledge and instinct far greater than any beast in the forest, and the value of experience is overrated, usually by old men who nod wisely and speak stupidly. In truth, experience teaches thoroughly, yet her course of instruction devours men's years, so the value of her lessons diminishes with time necessary to acquire her special wisdom. The end finds it wasted on dead men. Furthermore, experience is comparable to fashion, an action that proved successful today will be unworkable and impractical tomorrow. Only principles endure, and these now I possess. For the laws that will lead me to greatness are contained in the words of these scrolls. What will they teach me is to prevent failure than to gain success. For what is success other than a state of mind? Which two among 1,000 wise men will define success in the same words? Yet failure is always described in one way. Failure is man's inability to reach his goals in life, whatever they may be. In truth, the only difference between those who have failed and those who have succeeded lies in the difference of their habits. Good habits are key to all success. Bad habits are the unlocked door to failure. Thus, the first law I obey, which precedes all others, is I will form good habits and become their slave. As a child, I was a slave to my impulses. Now I'm a slave to my habits, as are all grown men. I have surrendered my free will to the years of accumulated habits and past deeds of my life and have already marked out a path which threatens to imprison my future. My actions are ruled by appetite, passion, prejudice, greed, love, fear, environment, habit, and the worst of these tyrants is habit. Therefore, if I must be a slave to habit, let me be a slave to good habits. My bad habits must be destroyed and new furrows prepared for good seed. I will form good habits and become their slave. And how will I accomplish this difficult feat? Through these scrolls. It will be done, for each scroll contains a principle which will drive a bad habit from my life and replace it with one which will bring me closer to success. For it is another of nature's laws that only a habit can subdue another habit. So, in order for these written words to perform their chosen task, I must discipline myself with the first of my new habits, which is as follows. I will read each scroll for 30 days as prescribed manner. Before I proceed to the next scroll, first I will read the words in silence. Then I will read the words in silence after I have partaken of my midday meal. Last, I will read the words again just before I retire at day's end, and most important, on this occasion, I will read the words aloud. On the next day, I will repeat the procedure, and I will continue in like manner for 30 days. Then I will return to the next scroll and repeat the procedure for another 30 days. I will continue in this manner until I have lived with each scroll for 30 days, and my reading has become habit. And what will be accomplished with this habit? Herein lies the hidden secret of all man's accomplishments. As I repeat the words daily, they will soon become part of my active mind, but more important, they will also seep into my other mind, that mysterious source which never sleeps, which creates my dreams and often makes me act in ways I do not comprehend. As the words of these scrolls are consumed by my mysterious mind, I will begin to awake each morning with a vitality I've never known before. My vigor will increase, my enthusiasm will rise, my desire to meet the world will overcome every fear I once knew at sunrise, and I will be happier than I ever believed it possible to be in this world of strife and sorrow. Eventually, I will find myself reacting to all situations which confront me as I was commanded in the scrolls to react, and soon these actions and reactions will become easy to perform, for any act with practice becomes easy. Thus, a new and good habit is born. For when an act becomes easy through constant repetition, it becomes a pleasure to perform, and if it is a pleasure to perform, it is man's nature to perform it often. When I perform it often, it becomes a habit, and I become its slave. And since it is good habit, this is my will. Today I begin a new life. I know that's long. There's a lot there. You'll have to read the book to understand the tone of it, but that's the principle. You know, if some of you are maybe looking at the healing journey that Brannon and I created, there's actually an assignment that's inside that healing journey that's based off of this principle, where you create basically a vision of what you want your life to look like, and then you put it on repeat for a number of days with that principle of allowing the conscious and the active mind to process it so many times that eventually the brain can't help but just make it normal. So that's the idea. So thank you guys. I hope this is helpful. Small but simple steps done consistently over time, understanding what it is that you're actually trying to speak to in your habits. So for me, my fingernails, it's about management of stress. I need to learn a new pattern to get to the management of stress, but the management of stress matters. Form good habits and become their slave. So hopefully that's helpful to you guys. Thank you for being here. If this is valuable, please share it with other people. We love having you here. We love having you be a part of what we're trying to do. And until next time, and in the words of my grandfather, keep on keeping.